Hiya, Amy here with Amy's Wares, and today I'm going to walk you through my big mistake and how I fixed it. So this is one of my 3-ring binders that I have stencils from A Colorful Life Designs in. I'm just flipping through to figure out which one I want to use today. I sort of have a general idea of what I want to make, or at least what I want to try doing, but I wasn't sure what stencil I wanted to use. So as you saw, I did end up landing on this gorgeous layered mandala stencil. This is the split mandala. This is the layered mandala. So this is the one I go with, and it's 2 pieces. However, I'm only going to be using the one of the more detailed layers for this card. Now here's a photo of the finished card. This was my recovery from the mistake that I made, which you're about to see, but I am going to work directly on a card base. I'm going to use my blending brushes from the Rabbit Hole Designs, and I also have some ink pads from Catherine Pooler. So I'm just going to put this detailed layer down on directly on the card base and try and mask off these other areas so I don't get ink where I don't want it. To start, I'm just going to use some residual ink on my blending brush because I don't want it to be too saturated and dark, and if I go directly to the juicy McJuicy ink pad, it's going to be too much. So I'm starting with just this residual ink and working over and quickly knocking that piece out of the top corner and getting ink where I didn't want it. So that's my first little mistake, but not the tragic one, folks. Stick around. So my idea here is I wanted to do like a direct pad to paper like ink swish on my card base, right? So I wanted to get it like really saturated and dark, and then I wanted to heat emboss in white on it because I thought, oh well, that's cool, because then I can just use ink in this cool little like organic swatch, if you will, and then just white heat emboss on it. So that's where I'm going at this point. I'm like, la la la, happy, it's going well. Sort of how I'm picturing it, and I'm using my heat tool to dry this ink because it's very saturated, and I do end up testing it, so I check it in a moment here with my embossing powder, and this embossing tool from the Rabbit Hole Designs. I'm just checking it first prior to doing any stamping with the Versamark because I don't want to try and do this if the ink is still wet. If it does, then it's going to stick wherever the ink is still wet. So my tester here, good thing I did it because you can see, yep, definitely still wet. So I brushed that all off, dried a little bit more with my heat gun, and then when I'm sure it's ready to go, I'm just going to come in and do the plan, right? So I'm putting the embossing powder down on top of it so that the embossing tool powder on it so that the embossing powder only sticks where I want it to. So I'm lining up this really cool sentiment excuse me, that says "You Matter to Me" from a Hero Arts. I think it's a collaboration. And then I'm just going to stamp it a couple times with the sticky clear embossing Versamark ink. So everything's going okay so well. I mean, it's not my favorite look with the way that I did the little swipe, but it's still what I was going for and still looking okay. So I'm just going to coat it a couple times with my Brutus Monroe Alabaster White embossing powder, and then I'm going to cook it again with my heat tool. So I made sure there's no little extra powder bits anywhere. It did a pretty clean job. That's the beauty of that embossing tool. If you don't have one, I definitely recommend it. That one is my favorite. So I cook that up and all is well. Now here is where everything's about to go south. So here, hindsight is 2020, right? Shouldn't have done that. Not a huge fan. Really shouldn't have done this. Now I really, really messed it up. Not pretty. So I was kind of thinking 3, design 3. It's better than 2, but I just really loused it all up. It didn't look good. No matter how many times I tried to make that little swipe work, didn't look good. So add another one. Yeah, good idea. That really worked. So basically I'm not going to use this as is now. I'm going to come up with another plan, and this is how I fix it. So I thought, well, the sentiment embossed beautifully. That's fine. So let's just die cut it out. So I kind of kick this to an angle so it still shows some of the cool stenciling and it's got all the heat embossing. And then I cut off the back of the card base because we don't want to waste the cardstock. And then I cut that panel down with a stitched edge die from LDRS, so make it fancy dancy. And then I'll just kind of recreate the look on this panel. So this way it's not a complete waste. I was able to basically reuse the card base, or at least part of it, for this panel. And then I'm going to do the same thing again and bring out the stencil and do the ink blending. So this, you can see I can attach it right onto this card base. It's going to give it a nice little border. So we're kind of starting over. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to really speed this up because, you know, you've seen this once before, but I'm going to mask off better than the first time and come in again with just the residual ink. Now I am pressing a little bit harder this time. You can see it's a little bit more vibrant. I was pretty light-handed the first time, but I thought, well, this color is okay. It's still not going to overtake the design. It's going to be fine. So I'm just pressing a little bit harder, and that's why the color is a little bit more vibrant. But again, it's still just the residual ink. So I'm just going to move the magnets, pull off the masking tape, and then now that panel is ready to go. So here I decide, this doesn't really work. It's kind of, it changes the shape kind of weird. So my solution to this is to go the next size up with this stitched oval scallop die. I'm going to fold over a piece of vellum so I can kind of cut two at once. And then I'm going to create basically 2 layers of this vellum to kind of put underneath the little die cut with the sentiment on it. So this is a way to kind of help it pop off the background. I often forget about vellum. I have quite a bit of it in my craft room, but it's a really nice option if you need a sentiment or like a critter, some sort of focal point to pop off a busy background. This is a nice option for you. And I'm just using some tape runner to attach these two, and I'm not worried about it showing through because I know that I'm going to be covering it with this die cut with the sentiment on it anyway. So I just kind of nestle that in the center, and then I'm going to pop this up with some foam tape. But I'm also thinking that I don't want white on white, so I'm risking it again here, guys. I'm getting risky again with a little swatching of the ink pad onto the card base, but thankfully this went better. So I go around all 4 edges on just the front of the card base, and I'm doing that with an extra scratch piece of paper so I don't accidentally get some of the ink on the back. And you can see I did end up having to make it a little bit fatter, so I did it a second time, just because I forgot I really cut down that panel size, so there was a bigger border than I remembered. So I'm just using this 1-inch foam tape from scrapbook.com. It's my favorite, and I'm popping this panel up, and then I'm just going to put another little strip of that behind this sentiment just to help it pop up even further. So there's double foam layer on this, so it does definitely have some dimension, so I'll want to bear that in mind if I ship it through, you know, the post office, to make sure that it's not too thick or too heavy. But I'm just going to trim off this little excess off the sides, add some white iridescent sequin blingage all over, some on the base, some on the vellum. I'm mindful to use odd numbers just because that's my preference, but adding just this extra little design feature. But overall, a pretty simple design. Would have been a lot more simple if I didn't mess it up, but it worked out okay in the end, and I'm glad I didn't just bin it because, yeah, it's still pretty, and I hope you enjoyed it. So if you found this helpful or you enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up, and I appreciate you spending time with me today. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.